Or
I
you
do
do
it.
that?
It's going,
Oh,
so we're
good.
recording.
Okay, good. Um, yeah, so just to give you a little background, my sister, who was, a speechwriter for senators in Washington, her mother-in-law was Assistant Secretary of Labor under Johnson. So she comes from a whole political situation, and she's joined me about a year and a half ago in writing this book called Trump's Salvation and Ours, an Empathetic Solution to Destructiveness.
Oh, wow. Great.
And yeah, and I'm coming from a psychoanalytic point of view that I've worked on for the last 25 years, that I learned from a guy who was sort of heir to what's called late Freud view of psychoanalysis. And so it's involves a lot of stuff like that. But we have a whole part two, we call it, on our salvation, reconciling the left-right conflict. And we have wonderful stories. The most amazing one is about a woman named Loretta Scott, or is that right? Yeah, I think that's right. Loretta Scott, who's a Black feminist scholar at Smith, and she thought of white supremacists as lower than low, and she hated them and so on. And then she got involved with a guy who was lapsed from the Aryan Nation, a higher up in it, and they formed a relationship. As you know, it's an involved story, but the long and short of it is that they became friends, and so that whole part of the book is about that, about how people come together, sometimes with professional help, sometimes not, uh, to tackle really super difficult conflicts, like the conflict between Black African feminist and a murderous white supremacist. There are other stories like that in there. And then it hit me, having followed you for, I don't know how long, 10 years or whatever, that ordinary people are craving that kind of reconciliation. But, the level of conflict involved between white supremacists and other people is foreign to them and not appropriate for them. But what you're doing is for the I hate to put it this way, but for shorthand's sake, for the average person who has, who have conflicting views about politics and social issues, and so we wanted to include more of what you have to offer as a hope for people like that they can have reconciling conversations and become involved in your movement, which is analogous to AA in one sense, that it could have much broader appeal than one might at first think. And so I wanted to explore that aspect with you as to how broadly you're operating. I mean, I read the thing you sent to me, and I understand, that you're getting involved in those kind of, on the street conflicts and so on. But if you could just tell me, what's the broadest application of what you're doing?
Well, it's really a movement. I see it as the empathy movement with the vision of building a culture of empathy. So it's quite broad in terms of its total cultural transformation to place empathy, meaning, deep listening as a primary social value. So that's why I'm running for Congress too. I don't know if you saw that.
Right, I saw that, yeah.
So it's really,
so what could be broader than that, right?
Yeah, it's try to I'm using the campaign machinery to get the word out about empathy. So it's kind of the larger umbrella is, we need an empathy movement to create this culture of empathy. And we just have all kinds of different projects and keep iterating and trying to
well, I understand the
expand that.
breadth of your aim, but I'm totally in line with that and want to support that in the book. But what I'm trying to get at is, how far have you gotten? In other words, what's the broadest effect that you think you've had?
What's the effect? So you're just kind of looking at the impact.
Mhm.
I just did an empathy circle with some of the other candidates who are running for the for the district. So there was three, and I can send you the link to that.
Yeah,
So
I'd love to have that.
5 candidates. 3 of us did an empathy circle, and it was broadcast on KPFA. It was 3 Democrats. The Republican was willing to take part, but the scheduling didn't work out. And then the others, for the establishment candidate, John Garamendi, he just didn't hear anything from him, like just total nothing, the establishment.
That's too bad.
Yeah. So, but we're, I keep working at it and I keep raising it. So that's that. And that sort of spread that there's actually someone who's been doing the empathy circles and just started the training, is trying to set that up in San Francisco. So
who's that?
A guy, Mike, can't remember, Zont, or he has 2 of the candidates willing to take part.
Oh, great.
There's 5 candidates, Nancy Pelosi and 4 other candidates. He has 2 of them lined up, and he's working on the other one. So I think
I found her to be very cagey about being involved in such things. But what's his name? I'd like you to spell his name.
Let me bring it up here. And I was just talking to him, and what's his last name? Zonta.
I'm glad I asked.
Zonta.
I never would have
figured
that out. Zonth. Okay.
Zonta.
Okay.
And
I'll probably want to contact him.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just talking to him about getting co-sponsors. So I did this once before with the Assembly District 15. It's our California Assembly District. We had 11 of the candidates doing empathy circles. And we got co-sponsors and having a whole list of co-sponsors.
Oh, good. Do you have a video of that?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it's all on video.
Okay. Can I just search and find that, or?
I can send it to you.
I want to find out as much as I can and then distill it into a compact, impactful presentation of what you're doing.
So, I can send you all those links.
That would be great.
We just finished one called Talk with Cops. So it was an empathy cafe. We had, we're working with an organization, Police to Peace. So they're kind of like a national organization that has a lot of connections with the police.
Well, that's awesome.
And I have links to that. So there was over 70 participants, and there's a lot of police. And we bring everybody together, had a little bit of an intro, and then we divided into breakout empathy circles. So the empathy circle practice is sort of the core, minimal viable practice. Because if you get people into kind of that mutual listening and empathy, they just start hearing each other. It slows the conversation down. It's core to conflict mediation. So
I'll be looking for particularly striking examples of that. Like the one I mentioned between the African American scholar and the Aryan nation leader is like so powerful. How could anybody imagine that could ever happen? And so anything like that, the most powerful, the most compelling examples in your work would be, I think, so arresting for people and great, to put it crassly, marketing for what you're doing. And I'm mainly wanting to, sort of roughly in the model of AA to try to see how this movement could spread. And, AA is in every county.
Mm-hmm.
So something like that.
Yeah, well, that's how I see it too. Kind of spread it
Oh,
as
good.
widely as possible. The
Okay.
practice. We have a training, so we've about over 300 people, I think, have done the facilitator training, and you're welcome to take it too. Training each cohort just started Monday. They last 5 weeks, so we train people in how to take, how to facilitate empathy circles. And there's all the trainings are recorded, so you can watch them too, just see how they work.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I might. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of, empathizing with people and creating empathetic relationships is my whole life. But I can imagine that I might learn something.
Yeah. Well, if you're looking for, it sounds like impact. I mean, something that comes to mind is Daryl Davis. He's not doing
He's in the book.
Oh, he's in your book.
Yeah.
I have an interview with him too.
Oh, you do?
And
well, I might send you what I wrote about him.
Okay.
You might be interested.
Yeah, we called it Empathizing with Racism.
That's a great idea.
Uh-huh.
I have a whole chapter on, there's a Tufts University study in 2013 that was analyzing people who were smitten by outrageous conservative talk shows. They were listening to it all the time and were, committed to that way of thinking. And, the heart of their complaint against liberals is that they're being called racist.
Mm-hmm.
And the chapters on name calling and the name calling of calling people racist is at the heart of it. And, there's this theory in the study, and people who've read it, saying that the epithet racist, starting in the 60s, is what is at the heart of our left-right conflict, because it's so disgraceful and shaming.
Mm-hmm.
It's come to mean mean-spirited, stupid, and all kinds of horrible things. So, yeah, that's right on the money of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, if you're racist, racism is a form of judgment. You're judging people one way or another, and there's plenty of different forms of judgment by class, by region, by religion, by ethnic group. So these are all sort of forms of judgment. And if you're just judging people for being judgmental, that's another form of judgment. So the way out of it is just to empathize. And instead of judging people, just try to listen and empathize.
Well, you might be interested in parts of my book. I have a section on shame for feeling ashamed, shame for shaming, and really get into it analytically, what's going on there and what its effect is, which is mainly, in parent-child relationships, it's the effect of it is to repress shame. So then people can't relate to the fact that they're being judgmental or shaming because it's repressed. They've been led to believe that it's weak and ridiculous to be judgmental. And I've posited that shame for feeling ashamed is the remediable cause of psychological problems.
Yeah,
it's great to talk to you. I'd love to have that title of your interview with Daryl Davis. I think that's a great title.
I better put a list here. It's a gather of. There was.
What was it again? What was the title again?
It was Empathizing with Racism.
That's so countercultural, but it's right on the money of what's needed to be said.
Yeah, let me see here.
Oops.
That's the wrong one. I wanted to show you the other one. Oh, there it is. So if you go to the cultureofempathy.com website, there it is.
Okay.
Empathizing with
Oh, okay.
Racism, Daryl Davis.
Yeah.
Empathy is not agreement, disagreement, sympathy, judgment, racism, or anti-racism. Empathy is equal to empathy, deep listening and seeing our common humanity. And so he was good with the topic. I mean, the titling of it too, which.
But it occurs to me now that, we're at the point where we're sending out, I don't know, the beginning of the book, maybe 4 chapters for comment. And I'd like for you to be one of those people.
Sure, I'd be glad to look at it. And this is the other one. This is a friend of Daryl's, Ryan Laurie. So he was a right-wing extremist, way back when, kind of left it, and we did the same thing, empathizing with racism. So I did the same topic.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, Daryl's story is amazing.
Yeah,
and to me, a visual is, it's a maxim, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words. But that video on his TED Talk of him milling with Ku Klux Klan members in full regalia, I thought that was powerful. And he's talking
it's a
to
great
the
example. Just there's a model.
It's just shocking to people. How could he do that? How could they do that? I mean, it's just so arresting. I think the whole idea of empathy is arresting, still in our culture. I mean, those of us who are steeped in it tend to forget that the average person thinks that empathy is weak and condoning and so on.
Well, I think what happens is that empathy is seen from an individualistic lens, like me or you being empathic and not seeing the relationship, that we're in a relationship and what's the level of empathy in the relationship. And I think that really changed it. And in the therapeutic context, right, you're listening to your clients and you're empathizing with them, and that, the Rogerian, writings about the benefits of that, how it reduces, alienation, makes you feel that sense of connection, the healing aspect. But what I think is missing is the relational part, and that's what the empathy circle is about. It's taking it out of the therapeutic and putting it into that relational, that you have, small groups that are listening to each other and trying to
be careful now, because therapy is about a relationship.
But it's not mutual. It's like it is. I mean, yeah.
Ideally, it is.
There is a.
I try to introduce people into that. This is a collegial venture. It isn't me dispensing wisdom. I have some, but it's really all up to you whether you agree with it or don't. And when you disagree, that informs me, and so on. So,
but it's not the client is not listening to the therapist, right? It's like the therapist, it's a one-way listening. There is a relationship. You can't get out of that being a relationship, but it's not a full relationship because the client is not learning how to listen better, and they're not learning how to take those empathy skills and take it into their family and hold empathy circles. So I think it's a start.
I for the most part, I agree with you, but the way I do it is different. Okay. I'm fully human in it, and they have feelings about me, and they have judgments about me, and they care about me, and it's a whole different ball of wax from the standard doctor-patient thing. And that's partly because I'm a minister, partly, but it's so much to do with how I was trained.
Are you an active minister? I mean, actively?
Well, I think of psychotherapy. I'm searching for the right terminology, but I think of myself as a minister doing this work, and I've even the psychotherapy I learned is really psychoanalysis, which is a foreign word for most people. But so I've called myself a psychoanalytic pastoral counselor, which is a mouthful. But that's the idea of it, is that, most ministers are doing an awful lot of individual counseling, especially in hospitals and prisons. And, I was trained by a prison chaplain. That's where I got my, the bulk of what I know and who I am as a minister is from him. So, yeah, my life's work is as a psychotherapist, which I often call it that because people insist on it, or they don't like the association with religion. But for me, it's all about being a Christian minister.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think with pastors, they're thinking in terms of the congregation, like what's the well-being. So there's
Right.
a sense, it's different than therapy, which tends to be more sort of one-on-one versus thinking about the well-being of the whole congregation. So there's a bit of a more relational
that's a very difficult venture. Of course, here I am talking about the whole nation in my book, but yeah.
So what are you seeing as the thrust? Like, what is the insight you have that you're suggesting to the, to your readers, or like, where do we go? Like, what do you know what I mean? It's like, what do you have an insight or a message sort of? Or
yeah, I mean, the most basic thing, I wrote another book that I didn't really market or deal with that much, called Empathetic Explanation, a solution to the psychological part, spiritual part of any problem. So I'm arguing that an accurate, credible, empathetic explanation of a behavior that you can't stand or that repulses you is the key to reconciliation with other people and within yourself. That's the basic idea. Mm-hmm. And then I have to explain all that and exemplify it, and that's a lot of what I do in the Trump book. In the other book, it's more, I give case examples of, like, I had a relationship with the mother of one of the two Columbine murderers, and I have a whole chapter on that. And then an alcoholic, and somebody who had a phobia. And so I exemplify this basic understanding. I think empathizing with people is really based on a credible understanding, more than a feeling per se. In other words, a credible understanding evokes a feeling, a compassionate feeling. And in my religion, I take off. I mean, the first epigraph in my preface is Jesus saying, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." And unlike anybody I've read, I called the dean of my seminary and asked if he knew of anybody who said this, but I think it may be an original insight. It's not that important, but it's important to know that it's a rare insight, that the last 7 words, "for they know not what they do," is an empathetic understanding. Why do I forgive them? Well, because they don't know what they're doing, which I think is a most general empathetic understanding of why anybody does something that's counterproductive or destructive.
And maybe the reason they don't know what they're doing is they're not listening deeply or empathizing with the people they're relating. So it's maybe putting that.
Yeah, but why they're not doing that is something else. I think it's because we're the first. Is this first chapter? No, the second chapter. No, it's the first chapter after the introduction. It's called Prevailing Morality. And so I argue that we're committed, deeply committed, at every level of society, including most psychiatrists, to the idea that shame and guilt are unnecessary, without which we'd all be barbarians. So that that pressure that's shot throughout our justice system, educational system, family systems, is really a large part of the problem. This, unwitting, unthinking commitment to that idea is really so influential as to why people don't listen, why they don't feel empathic, because they're interpreting all behavior through the lens of prevailing morality that says people do bad things because they're bad, or because they're shameful, or they're weak, or they're irresponsible. And so that's so ingrained in us and is so, influential as to why we don't listen. We shouldn't listen. We already know. That's why we shouldn't listen. We already know that, Trump's a horrible person who deserves to be killed or locked away forever because he's a sociopath. He doesn't care about anybody. We have all these ideas that are, so degrading, and we believe them so fervently and so automatically that's what makes listening, thinking, considering things so difficult.
Well, the strategy, I'm looking at is training, because I think people are not trained in the listening skills. There's no real sort of practices. And I just find the empathy circle is sort of the easiest first step. You get sort of the most bang for the buck for the time and energy for practicing the empathy circle. And then doing that at the grassroots, like we do in the empathy tent and the trainings, and we holding all these different empathy circles. And then if we can also get the high profile people, the congressional representatives, if we could have had Trump and Biden doing an empathy circle, or get Nancy Pelosi and Schumer, and Schumer. And
I think Pelosi's less likely to do it than Trump sometimes.
It's possible, but it's
I don't
just
know.
like it's
kidding.
sort of building that movement, just like anything. It's like, it takes time. You got to keep iterating, and it's you'll write a book, you'll mention it, some people see it, and they'll try it. And so creating the story, the narrative of why this is important. And when people experience it, it's like we set up the empathy tent, like in Berkeley. There's a biker rally every year. These bikers come to Berkeley, and it started when Code Pink was trying to shut down the Marine Recruiting Center in Berkeley. Then there was like a counter demonstration, and every year to celebrate that, the bikers, a whole group of bikers, come to Berkeley, and they just ride their bikes right up to the front steps of this old city hall, and then they give the finger to Berkeley, right? So, and there's maybe, 100, 150 bikers, just all.
Like you say, they just want to be heard.
They just want to be heard. And we set up the empathy tent right there and offered listening. And we had, a group of conservative women.
That's a great story.
We had a group of conservative women, talking with one of our members, and then a Berkeley liberal came and.
Okay, now that's the kind of thing that I think would be impressive. So you have a tape of that?
I don't have it taped, but I have the
a report, or
a picture of the. Well, so there's a Berkeley liberal, and I said, oh, and she said, oh, I live in my bubble here. I never talked to conservatives. I said, there's conservatives right here. Let's have an empathy circle. So I sat them down, and I had them do the empathic listening. One speaks and the other listens and reflects.
But the bikers were involved?
The women were with the bikers.
Oh, they were biker models, so to speak? Or?
Yeah, like, I don't know what they call them, but it was a whole group.
That's what's typical. I used to have a biker model as a client. Mm-hmm. So that'd be a good one. There's no record of that?
It wasn't recorded. It was only the afterwards.
Well, I might want to interview you about that again. But anyway, depending on what else I see. I'm looking for, really impactful, arresting
Stories.
examples. Yeah, stories. And what I might offer you in return is to explore the hypothesis that when it doesn't work, okay, which, social scientists say those are the most enlightening parts of any study is, well, when it works, why doesn't it work? And my hypothesis would be is that there's some unconscious shame getting in the way of reconciling conversation.
I don't see it in. It seems to be. It's like.
Well, do you have examples? I'm sorry.
Why will people not sit down and dialogue? If you're saying it's
because I'm arguing shame. Why. I'm saying why, but in order to prove my point, I'd have to have examples where you feel like what you're doing didn't work.
Well, it doesn't work in the sense that John Garamendi ignores us and won't take part, but that's...
Maybe I'll interview him.
That'd be a good point. Yeah, it's... I did talk, Gavin Newsom came, when he was running for office, he came into an event. I went there and I said, hey, would you and that was when John Cox was running, the Republican was running for governor. And he said, and I said, would you do an empathy circle with John Cox? He says, John Cox has no empathy. I said, well, if he
not
would,
for our side anyway.
I said, if he would do it, would you do it? He says he wouldn't do it. And then I said, well, if he would do it, would you take part? And he didn't answer me. And I said, well, I'll go ask him if he'll take part. That
shows you where he's at.
Yeah.
He's so political, he doesn't want to.
And then I said to his campaign manager who was standing there, I said, do you think he'd take part? And he says, he's not going to take part. And I said, why? Is it because he doesn't want to give attention to John Cox? And he said, that's right. So as a candidate, you want to give political maneuvering, you want to give as little attention to your opponent. Yeah. Right. And that's about power, right? It's not like he's ashamed. It's like he wants the power, and it's a manipulative ploy, I imagine. And it's probably the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, he might get shown up.
But he had, he didn't understand what an empathy circle was, so I understand that. But it would have been a way to really model constructive dialogue. So he would have influenced a lot of people saying, hey, we can bridge our divides.
Right.
Just as John Garamendi could do it, or Nancy Pelosi could do it if they understood. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the Democrats, when Joe Biden was elected, he gave his talk at the Chase Center. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
And on the screen, there was 2 huge giant screens that said the people have chosen empathy.
Wow.
And it flashed. It said the people have chosen. It was the Democrats, when they had the, it was Biden.
But it'd be helpful to be more specific. Who created that sign?
Well, it had to be the party. Who ordered it?
Huh?
I mean, the party had to, let's see, let me bring it up here. It's empathy. I mean, it had to be the political party, whoever was running the campaign.
Yeah.
And
I have some political party friends. I might ask them.
But the point is, let's take a look. So Wall Street Journal.
That's a great one. I mean, it'd be.
Look at that.
Oh yeah.
That is Kamala Harris. She was out there, and these signs flashed. The people have chosen empathy.
Oh, it's Kamala Harris.
Yeah. Then Biden came and talked too. It was right after he was elected. Where they give their.
What do you think of her? She's an enigma to me, partly because I just don't study it that much. But
yeah, I don't really know. I don't know until people are willing to sit down and talk. If she is willing to have an empathy circle and dialogue, that'd be one thing. But anyway,
Yeah.
that sign kind of flashed with different
Yeah, that's cool.
terms. Had unity, and then people have chosen
This is going to
unity
be on our
scientists.
Zoom record, right?
It'll be shared. Yeah, you'll be able to
Yeah,
see it.
cool.
So it'll be recorded, so
Yeah.
you can. I'll post this to YouTube. So.
All right. Well, I think we could talk for a long time. You know, one of the things I wanted to make sure and say to you, that's just kind of a what used to be called a trade last, is that William R. Miller from the University of New Mexico, that you had
Oh
you
yeah,
had a
Bill Miller.
conversation with her.
Him, Bill Miller, or
Yeah, him. Sorry,
okay.
him. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
sorry. He was prominent now, mildly prominent in my life, because I started writing about controlled drinking treatment, in which he was very prominent.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book called Controlled Drinking. And, you know, it was a very progressive position back in the early 80s when AA was being, you know, touted as the only answer. And I had an article published in the Washington Post on alternatives to AA. And so when I saw him and you talking, I thought that was pretty cool. He's a great guy.
He is. He has a little book called Listening Well. It's it's excellent book on just the, you know, how to do empathic listening and sort of framing of it.
You know, I don't know if you know this, but the whole Department of Corrections of California adopted what's called motivational interviewing. You know about that?
Oh, that's what he created. Yeah,
Yeah,
he created
right.
motivational interviewing.
Yeah, I was a social worker in a parole office here in San Francisco for a while. And that came around, and I can tell you that the parole agents snubbed their noses at it. You know, they didn't understand why they would be doing this, because criminals are sociopaths and they're unreachable and so on. But I have an example in my book of two very violent, one of whom was a long-term convict. And I talk about how they were reached by means of empathy. And it's very powerful. I mean,
well, I think we should be doing empathy training in the prisons. It should
absolutely.
It should be the core thing. It's like if you're, you know, if you're breaking the law, stealing, whatever, you know, you're not being empathic, sensitive to the experience of the people you're impacting. So instead of retribution and punishment, it should be about, hey, learn these empathy skills and come out as a, you know, highly skilled empathic facilitator.
What the stories say is that first, I mean, it's a dictum, I don't know, in psychotherapy, in the ministry, that in order to be empathic, you have to be empathized with. And that's what happened in these stories, that one guy tried to choke his daughter, and all of a sudden he awoke out of this fugue, and then he was in jail awaiting trial, and a flyer came around for anger management, and he put the two together. You know, I tried to choke my child and I was furious at her, and anger management. So he went into it. And I know the guy that ran that program, Hamish Sinclair, his name was. And what happened was that they asked him, well, why are you a convict? Why are you brutal? Why are you violent? Why are you selling drugs? What's this all about? Where did this come from? And he started explaining, well, when I was 5 years old, my mother was in prison and she was high yellow. And my aunt was a dark black woman, and she hated my mother. And whenever she caught me staring at white people, or if I had grass stains on my blue jeans, she'd pick me up and body slam me. And she poured scalding water on the faces of me and my brother. And when he was telling the story, he started bawling. And the people in the group said, something happened to you that helps explain your life of crime. And that began his transformation. It's an amazing story of empathetic understanding and feeling for him. And there's another story like that. He and I went to Davis graduate school and presented his story. And they all said, well, the standard line is, well, he aged out. He was 45. And that's the only reason criminals change is because they get tired of the life, And everything we said about his transformation just went one ear and out the other. Every one of these graduate students and the professor. And so I thought, well, this is a roadblock to what I'm trying to do. So I went and I found a young guy in his early 20s who, used to beat people up on the street for fun. And he was a drug dealer. And he got caught and he was facing a 12-year sentence, and he opted for diversion program at Walden House in San Francisco. And one day he was very gregarious, and he was fooled everybody that he was going along with the program. And one day he got privileges, and he went out and he made 3 robberies and got high again and came back in. And he was tweaking like crazy, and he was threatened with being thrown out. And his counselor, who was an ex-con, came to him and started crying. And he said to him, where have I failed? I haven't helped you. And this young man, when he was telling me the story, just started emoting, rocking back in his chair. And he said, no one ever treated me like that. No one ever related to me like that. And it really began his transformation, that like powerful empathy. It's not you, it's that we don't know how to deal with you, So that story is in my book, and I'm really counting on it to affect people, and say, well, even people like this that you normally, I've had African-American people who are involved in Clyde and really committed to youth say that this guy beat people up on the street was unredeemable, that he was just beyond any understanding. And here he became a model citizen with empathetic feeling for other people and so on, because of the spirit in which this ex-con treated him. So I'm hoping that kind of profound story will influence people toward reconsidering the power and profundity of empathy.
Well, it sounds like you're trying to affect people by telling these stories of transformation, and then hopefully that will impact them to take some kind of an action.
Yeah, well, and then, right along in there, right after there will come you. Here's a mechanism, a method and a program and a movement that you can get involved in if these stories affect you, impress you, as a testament for the power of empathy.
Well, it sounds like a good approach to kind of lay out the transformation, then say, here's how you can, here are some steps.
Then there you come.
It's like join the empathy movement,
right,
take part
exactly.
in an empathy circle.
That's
learn
exactly
how to facilitate an empathy circle, and then
all right, and and the more I can glean from your tapes and so on, stories like that, that have a certain profundity and depth and power to them, the more I can interest them in what you're doing. I have to be honest, when I first heard about you and started reading about your stuff, it seemed, superficial isn't the right word, but people could write it off as being not powerful, the things I first started hearing. And the things I'm hearing today, and there's the whole reason I wanted to meet with you, are not like that. They're more effective, and that's what I want to, I want to get really great, powerful examples from what you're going to send me to put in the book to try to sell what you're doing. Because otherwise, I think you're in danger of being written off as being too superficial. Oh, this couldn't work for most people or whatever, but I understand that's not true of what you're doing, but I'm just afraid that's how it could be perceived.
Yeah.
And I want to combat that.
Right. It's like people don't sort of see the power of it, and it's like, oh, this is just superficial.
Yeah, it's for people who are already amenable to talking to people, and but not people who are really kind of entrenched against the opposition. That's what we're up against in this country, is that, this wonderful study I reported, so ironic that my sister was summa cum laude from Tufts, and she's my editor. And here's this amazing study showing that people are committed to the right, meaning, roughly speaking, to outrageous right-wing radio shows, where they're tuning into them all the time and feeling supported by them. And the heart of that commitment is to combat the feeling that they're horrible people because they're called racist. So I think you have an alternative to that, and I, that kind of person, which, they say, if you can sway 5 to 10% of the electorate, you're going to beat these, monstrous people. And that's really one of the most passionate commitments I have, is,
well, I get along
to try to
with,
sway people to, give up on that stupid stuff.
I usually get along with the conservatives. Like when we set up the empathy tent the first time in Berkeley, the right wing came, the 2%ers, the Proud Boys, etc. came, and then there's the counter demonstrators. Anyway, we went and set up really early, and it was just a handful of the right wing. We went over, we have these little empathy kisses, we call them, chocolates, offered them empathy kisses. And I was a little nervous. We've got we have the tent set up, and we've got this little card. It says, free empathy, come to the empathy tent for free empathy. And, everybody's welcome to see your humanity. And, we listened. And then at another event, and at first you're kind of nervous, like, hey, you hear all these horrible things, but they're very friendly as long as you're just listening and not sort of attacking. People are usually pretty friendly. We did the same thing at another event, and we had an empathy circle right there on the lawn. And there was sort of a right-wing guy. We said, oh, come to the empathy circle. And he took part. And afterwards, he said, I'm ex-military, like, if you ever need help, I'm here to protect you. It was like, because we just listened to him, and he was like part of the circle. And he said, I'm here to help you guys out, with the listening. And that video I sent you too, that the link to the video, that there's an impeach Trump rally in Los Angeles. We did 6 pairs of mediations, and across the street.
Well, I've got a lot of work to do reading
across
your
the
things.
street was, they were doing knockdown, drag out, screaming and yelling.
Yeah.
And here we had hugs, 6 pairs of people dialoguing with each other from the left and right, and they all hugged each other. And it's on.
Well, I'm going to be a skeptical. There's an old phrasing for this. I can't remember. Sympathetic skeptic or something like that. That I want to challenge what you're doing.
Challenge
from my psychoanalytic point of view, from the kind of deep renovative therapy with sociopaths and so on, but very sympathetically. I mean, and the whole point would be to lift you up, to people who would tend to write you off as being superficial, you know.
The culture is against it. We go there, there's 200 or 300 on the right, there's maybe 300 or 400 people on the left, and there's 4 or 5 people in the empathy tent. That is the culture we live in. It's
right.
like there is such a small group, and people are just, they just, you know.
Yeah, well, here's to
because,
broadening that beyond
yeah.
belief. Okay, that's my aim.
Yeah, it's like, how do we broaden it? How do we kind of get the word out? You know,
right.
is
Well,
the question.
Yeah, I think, well, again, I think it's, for my money, it's about having compelling examples. All the talk in the world about being loving or empathic and so on and so forth goes in one ear and out the other. But if you have a stark, arresting story, then people pay attention.
Breitbart wrote about it.
Who? Breitbart?
Breitbart, and it was on Fox and Friends. They talked about the empathy circle. They totally misunderstood it, because it was actually a right-wing guy came to the empathy tent, and he was wearing a military helmet, and he had a bulletproof vest, and he sat down, and I was just listening to him. Said, "Oh, my shoulders are hurting so badly from this bulletproof vest." So one of our members said, "Oh, I'll give you a massage." So she started massaging his shoulders while I'm doing empathic listening with him. And some people from the media came by and took a picture of that. And it was actually a right-wing guy, you know, from the right wing. Yeah. And then Fox and Friends, you know, put it on Fox and Friends. And they said, "Empathy tent gives massages to Antifa."
Oh my God.
I mean, it's totally, you know, it's totally crazy.
Horrible.
It's pretty.
Yeah, well.
I mean, just the media in terms of how it kind of distorts stuff, you know?
Yeah. So. Well, yeah, that's why we have writers on the left, you know, we're trying to combat that shit and you know, offer something that will convince people. You know, I'm from Indiana. I was born in Indianapolis. And so were both my parents and all my relatives. And my father voted for Goldwater. You know, and so that's part of my heritage is, you know, learning how to talk to those people. And
yeah, my family.
I think that's a lot of what's needed. I mean, a lot of political savvy people say, yeah, we need to talk to the rural people in the Midwest and the far West. And I'm saying, here I am.
Yeah,
I know how to do that.
Do you have that background then?
Yeah, yeah. I'm totally
in that environment.
I'm a Hoosier through and through.
Yeah, I'm the same. I came from the Central Valley, Sacramento, and my family is mainly Trump supporters. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, how does that go? Talking with them.
One thing we've had family empathy circles where I've mediated family, you know, conflicts, and it went really well. And
good.
But then I had thought that if people see how this works, that they would sort of maintain it. But there's a real sort of an institutionalization, I think, is needed to keep it going. Because if I'm not there to keep holding the circles, you know,
well,
people just kind of revert back to the mean,
well,
you know.
My ideology is that, you know, they're engulfed by prevailing morality, you know, that
prevailing
you
morality
guys
is a good word for it. Yeah.
Huh?
Prevailing morality is a good word for
it.
it.
That's prominent in my book. I have a whole chapter titled that, you know.
And it's how do we shift that status quo to make empathy?
Well, I'd love for you to respond back to, I'd love for you to respond to it. Yeah.
I think one thing is people having the experience, but I don't know, maybe it's, do you know of any organizations that would co-sponsor this empathy circle in San Francisco with Pelosi? Because I found that if we have more organizations on a list that are saying, hey, we'll just be co-sponsors. Yeah. See this organization.
Have you reached out to churches?
I I think that's what I've been thinking of is churches like
Now, what's
Interfaith.
your, okay, I won't tell anybody. What's your religious background? Do you
I
have,
grew up
I mean, like, a lot of
Baptist.
people I
Yeah.
talk to at my coffee shop, they hate Christianity, and especially, and that's okay, I understand it. But, maybe you don't have a great feeling about religion.
Yeah, I grew up, kind of conservative Baptist, did a lot of traveling, and
Oh,
it just kind of like disappeared. So I just don't, I don't think in religious terms. I don't,
yeah.
I'm like,
Well, it should interest you that in one of my chapters, I have an imaginary speech delivered by a Southern Baptist preacher it tends to be, he's pretty much liberal in his thinking. It's unbelievable. He's against the criminalization of abortion. And that's what I have an imaginary speech for him to deliver. But, there's a lot more variation amongst evangelicals than you would imagine. I mean, 30% of them are against criminalization. It's a Pew study. But anyway, there's that. There's evangelicals that might be open to you, but mainly there's mainline Protestants, Methodist, Presbyterian, American Baptists, and some Catholics and so on who would be very receptive. I mean, there's a place in I live in Noe Valley,
okay.
and there's a church there that's really a Presbyterian church, but it's called the Noe Valley Ministry. And I'd say they're kind of moderate to liberal or whatever, but I'm sure they'd be interested in what you're saying. And then there are, in the Presbyterian church, there are, what do you call it? I want to say conclaves, but all up and down Northern California, there's what's called, I'm so far out of it, it's embarrassing, but a synod or a general assembly or whatever.
Oh, the Catholics?
A level of organization within the Presbyterian church.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a presbytery, that's what it is. From Marin all the way up to the Oregon coast, west of Sacramento, there's a presbytery, 50 churches or whatever.
Okay.
And so they have meetings where all those guys come together. And I don't know why they wouldn't be interested in hearing from you.
Yeah, it's more the
I could ask them.
organizational
I could front for you.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, if they wanted to
I could ask them.
co-sponsor.
And then there are similar ones over in the East Bay,
Mhm.
going up, the central and eastern part of California, and then all the way down and so on. I mean, all over. There's a general assembly for the whole country of Presbyterian churches that might be interested. I don't know.
Yeah, if you know of anyone to contact. We did start a Interfaith Empathy Cafe. So it's every 2 weeks on Saturdays. So we just started.
Yeah, that's good, but it's, I'm speaking in terms of bang for your buck. These denominational organizations are powerful.
Yeah, if they would co-host an empathy cafe with Pelosi and other candidates.
By the way, I went to Pelosi with my book, and at that time, I was most smitten by this allegation that Trump had raped a 13-year-old girl in 1994. And I had beaucoup evidence. I mean, it was incredibly credible, and it's in my book now. But I went to it with her, went to share that with her legal advisor, and he thought enough of it to pass it on to her. And then, I'm pretty sure that she didn't want to deal with it because it was just too inflammatory. But her reason was, we don't want to re-traumatize her. She was perfectly willing. The so-called victim the alleged victim was perfectly willing to be re-traumatized. But Pelosi ducked out of that. And I don't know, tend to think that's the way most politicians are. They want to do what they're doing and not step outside that bubble because it's just too unpredictable as to how people react. If they were to hear about empathy, like I said before, empathy has a reputation of being condoning, being weak,
Mhm.
and so once they identify themselves, I know when I wrote about this when Hillary Clinton touted empathy in the beginning of her campaign against Trump. She got beat up and she stopped doing it.
I didn't see her say much about it before the campaign, but afterwards, when after she had lost, she started talking. She did it, gave a couple of speeches about it, mentioned it at Yale and another university. So she had sort of a come back to empathy moment there.
Well, I'm telling you for sure.
Very, very eloquently about it.
Yeah, well, good. But, like I'm saying, she did it during the campaign, the beginning of the campaign, and she got beat up and she stopped doing it in the campaign.
Well,
I did that research, and
okay.
Obama's guilty of the same problem. I mean, he's, touting empathy and then withdrawing from it, not pressing it, not, expounding it. For my money, that's what he should be doing.
In fact, I think it's his lack of standing up for empathy that led to Trump.
Oh, very good.
It's like he talked about it, and that was one of the big reasons I was like supporting it. I have a whole page of all the times he's talked about empathy, like all the quotes, even videos of it.
Oh, that'd be cool.
And
I haven't, in my book, I have him giving a speech.
Oh, he talked about it endlessly on, let me just give you this link here. And I'm gonna put it in the chat if you want to open it up.
Yeah.
So that's you can just scroll down all the times. I mean, he started talking about empathy back in 2001, 2002.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He gave this really good talk at the Martin Luther King, 2002, and he was very eloquent. He talked about it. It was Oprah, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then what happened is that he said that he was going to choose a Supreme Court justice that, had skills, had the knowledge, had everything, and had a sense of empathy. And then the conservatives went kind of crazy about that, like at Fox
about
News,
the empathy.
About the empathy. Jeff Sessions just railed against empathy. What is it? What does that mean? What is this empathy stuff? So he was, a chief, the judiciary chairman at the time. And they even created a questionnaire that every judicial, every district, the circuit court and Supreme Court justice had to fill out this questionnaire. Are you now, or have you ever been empathic? Really, and you
like being a communist.
It was crazy, and the Democrats just melted. They had no idea how to talk about it. They almost said nothing, and it was almost like a shift right at that point. And if they would have been able to, have like a hearing about what we mean by empathy, have some empathy circles, it would have been a huge shift. If Obama would have not demanded, but said, "Hey, I want to have an empathy circle with the leadership of the Republicans and have it recorded," it would have been a transformative moment.
Okay,
so
there's you enabling people to feel for each other. Okay. But even psychologists are turned off. I mean, they make this distinction between cognitive and what's the other one? Affective. Yeah. And I think it's a bogus distinction.
It's totally bogus. It's a total mess without.
Yeah, I try to say that you may feel, naturally without information for somebody, but that's because you have all this knowledge. And I make a strong case for the cognitive therapy. If it's to be one test of its adequacy and accuracy is whether it makes you feel for the person. I mean, even with Trump, I say, well, you know, you may hate the guy, but I'm hoping this book will move the needle from -10 to 0 or something, you know. And that's the whole point, is that, you know, we're supposed to feel for each other. That's the bottom line as to what enables us to be pro-social. But it happens in conflicts because of truly understanding, having a credible understanding of why somebody. I give a simplistic example of a couple of women walking down the street, and they see a guy kind of staggering, and one turns to the other and says, well, he's drunk, you know, how reprehensible in the middle of the day. And the other one says, no, he's got MS and his walker got stolen. So all of a sudden, the first lady's decrying attitude has changed. You know, now she feels for the guy and even wants to help him. And that's a snapshot of what's trying to happen when you try to understand somebody and how they're deserving of your consideration.
I guess we're talking about the definition. How do we define empathy?
That's right.
And
I adjure
right
you
now.
to emphasize that what enables me, if you just talk about empathy, everybody's thinking feeling for,
right?
You know, and oh, how can I feel for so-and-so? Well, if you understand them, then you can.
And the way you understand it is by listening, and then it's
Listening,
also about
mutual, and asking questions and really knowing them, really understanding them. That's the bottom line.
Sensing into who the person is
right.
how I'm defining it, at least. And then also for the mutuality of it. And I think, that's the core of the empathy circle. The empathy circle puts that into a structural practice. So you have
I think that ought to be
doing it. And then people experience it. They really get a sense of the felt experience.
Yeah, I'm not that aware of that. I'm going to try to become more aware of that structure. But I believe you. I think that's an important aspect to try to help people jump in the shoes of people who are going through the cafes and the training. Otherwise, they're just thinking, oh, I'm supposed to care. You know?
Yeah, it's more
and that's the death
to
to an empathy program, is the adjuring people, pressuring people to care when they just don't feel it.
Yeah,
then they're going to run away.
I don't say you have to care about people in the empathy circle. It's like you don't have to care, you just have to listen to them. And usually once you start hearing people, you start seeing who they are, you kind of start saying, oh, you used to start caring. But it's not the.
I'm glad that's having an effect. It's just that for me, being a horrible skeptic, if somebody says I got to listen, then it smells like I've got to care. I've got to invest myself in listening. Whereas if somebody says to me, well, okay, you don't like so and so, if you understood them, I think you'd feel differently.
I think the understanding comes from the being willing to listen. So,
but why would I be willing to listen if I hear it listening as caring?
Well,
that's my worry anyway.
Yeah. So you're concerned. I get it. You're concerned that people feel there's an exhortation or a push.
Yeah, exactly. To care. Very good.
And if you don't,
you're really listening to me.
Yeah, if you don't care, you have to care, and then there's this pressure to care, and it's like, I don't want to be pressured to care. And then how do you say? But how do you present your thing without
being perceived as pressuring to care, which people are up to here with? They're just there's a lot of articles about compassion fatigue.
I don't go.
Well, you don't have to have it. You don't have to work hard. I say you don't have to work hard at feeling for people or being compassionate.
No, it's
you just have to understand them. Just listen, and
and free
like
speech.
You say,
free speech. Say anything, express anything you want. It's like conservatives. Oh, you got to be nice. Got to be no political correct. Say whatever you want. You will be heard to your satisfaction.
That's a great
and in return, you have to listen to the other person and hear them. So it's an agreement. It's like we're going to listen to each other. So you got to start somewhere, and people have to have some, buy into some things. You got to start somewhere.
All right. Yeah. Well, for me, I'd start with you're in conflict. You're not enjoying it. It's not fun. Maybe it is some of the time.
Yeah.
But
The
you
pain, you're
secretly
feeling
would like to
pain.
resolve this. You'd like to feel okay with people.
Mhm.
Here's how you do it. You try to, you have to understand them, and that's on them and you asking questions and having conversations where you listen to each other and so on. That's my
Yeah,
whole shtick,
that's the
But,
core.
it's great to
The
talk with you
motivation.
though on this level.
Yeah.
I'm so often on the psychoanalytic level, which is really more like technical aspects of understanding people that aren't really, aardvark, jargonistic psychoanalytic stuff. It's more just details of
Mhm.
what's going on. But
Well, it sounds like
it's
you
great.
think the motivation is that people are in pain and then are looking for ways out of the
Yeah,
pain.
I think it is. I think it's hard, and they're scared to
Yeah.
death, right? I mean, that's part of the pain is like
Fear.
we're both saying, in this culture, you're just scared to death of what's happening.
Yeah, lose democracy, things are falling apart, things not getting done. Yeah,
Here's a idea I had this morning about about autocracy and why it's so popular. It's because a reason it's so engaging is because the autocrat makes you feel like they know exactly what's going on, whereas you don't. And so they're getting rid of whatever anxiety you have. And underneath that is shame for not knowing, shame for being confused, shame for being lost. And if we all understood, if we shared, well, yeah, I don't understand. Yeah, I feel lost. I'm trying to understand. And that's not a sin, that's not shameful for you to feel that way. Then we can talk. We don't have to pretend that we know what's going on. But the autocrat is saying, oh, I'll get rid of all that. I'll get rid of all your anxiety and your questions and so on. Here's the truth. Here's what to do. And that's what makes it so appealing, is because we're all so anxious. And we're anxious about going to one of your earlier points. We're anxious about being anxious. We can't accept it. It's so intolerable. It seems so weak. It seems so crazy. It seems like it's going nowhere. But if we say, well, that's the human condition, and actually there's a silver lining. If we're anxious, meaning we have a lot of questions, we're going to find out stuff by talking to each other and listening.
Yeah. That's what the empathy circle is about. It's like
we don't say you have to
trust. We don't have to trust. It's like
in an autocrat, right?
But you just listen, and once you start trusting that you'll be heard, like, oh, I will be heard in this relationship, then you kind of open up. So I don't try to push, be vulnerable and all that kind of stuff. It's just, just be willing to listen to the other person.
I think that's a point I'm not appreciating enough. If you're really heard, and it is a part of what I believe, but it's not enough of a point of emphasis that if I'm heard and understood, that's very relieving to me. Even though at the end of that conversation, I may not have, quote unquote, the answers, but the respect involved in someone listening and being understanding me is relieving of the disrespect that I feel.
Yeah.
That's the way I
it
parse
releases
that.
Oxytocin to be heard versus cortisol. So if you're dealing with stress and all this kind of stuff, you're not heard, your body's full of cortisol, it's painful, it's uncomfortable. Somebody listens to you and your body suddenly gets some oxytocin. It's like, oh, this feels pretty good. I kind of like this oxytocin, or the feeling that oxytocin gives you, right? So
yeah, that's the biochemical dimension of it.
Yeah, and that's part of it. So what's going on under the covers?
Well, I'm kind of wearing out for no other reason than I'm tired and I'm 81 years old. What?
I go for hours of this stuff.
Me too, but being 81, by the way, I have to ask you, this is like not major, but a criterion of a relationship for me, and I'm mostly joking. But are you a basketball fan?
Basketball, no, I'm not a sports fan.
You're not a sports
Football,
fan.
baseball. I kind of like doing stuff versus
Yeah, I
not
do
much
too.
in-
I write music and I sing, but
Hope we can still be friends.
no, most of my friends are not into sports. I just happen to be because my father was, and I played basketball in college, and I know so much about it. And there's a serious side. Is it's been described as basketball's been described as balletic, and it's really true. I mean, they're just amazing physical beings, and then I had the amazing experience of having tremendous aim. I could go out to half court and make 3 shots in a row from half court. I've made holes in one in golf and played incredible bowling and so on. So there's something magical about having amazing aim. And the Warriors happen to have the quintessential aimer in Stephen Curry. I mean, he's just phenomenal. So I'm going to be glued to the TV at 6:30.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. That's the
But
segue.
right now, I think I should rest. I mean, I so enjoyed this. I so appreciate your comments, and I look forward to trying to find the most arresting examples of what you're doing for my book.
Okay, well, I'll send you some of those links and you can let me know if you have any questions, and I'll post this to YouTube, and so you can always reference it. And I'll send you the link to the transcripts too, if you're wanting those.
Yeah. Yeah, now I will try to inquire about, you appearing at a Presbyterian meeting, and not just the one I belong to over here, but, well, I mean, I belong to the one in Sonoma County, and all up and down the West Coast of California. But, I have ins with the whole country as far as the Presbyterian Church goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they like to be if they're like valuing dialogue and would like to see the candidates like have a constructive dialogue in the empathy circle format versus the debate or the forum approach.
Right.
The forums is they ask a question, they give you 1 minute to answer, and they go through everybody, and you can hardly really.
Well, here I am.
Yeah.
As an ordained Presbyterian minister, okay, graduate of a seminary, interpreting the last 7 words of Jesus as expressions of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
To my knowledge, no one's ever done that before. I'm promoting that in this book, that we ought to think of it that way. And when I speak to Presbyterians, I bring that up. I mean, for God's sake, it's it's the last words of his life. We ought to be taking it seriously. And so when he says, for they know not what they do, that's an empathetic explanation of their heinous behavior. And if that explanation is valid for them, then it is for all of us. And so
I hope to be.
Huh?
I like to see the Bible rewritten around empathy as the core.
Yeah, well,
it's like
that's what I just said.
That's kind of like kill all the Jericho folks, or
one more thing
kill the Egyptians firstborn, and so forth.
Okay, you're catching on to that. And one more thing in that line, St. Patrick. The story of St. Patrick. Huh?
Something about St. Patrick. No, I just know, isn't he?
Let me just tell you. Okay, I've written about this for years. There's a book called How the Irish Saved Civilization. And it turns out that St. Patrick was shanghaied from England by the Celtic barbarians and made to be a sheep tender, put out naked on the bluffs for, I don't know, some people say 6 years, and then he escaped and went back to England and became a priest and went back to Ireland. And within 5 years after he returned, there were other priests, I think, who were doing the same thing, but it's really prominent in his history that during those 5 years, around 500 AD, the Celtic barbarians gave up human slavery, human sacrifice, and the subjugation of women. 1,300 years before we did. And it was all because, I think Christians would say, because he was advocating love and so on and so forth. But the author of How the Irish Saved Civilization says it's because as a slave, he knew them. He knew that they were amenable to this kind of humanistic thinking and was able to craft a way of getting across, hey, you shouldn't be killing people, enslaving them and subjugating women. And then women rose to the highest positions in the churches. Way back then, before Presbyterians prohibited that, and it was only in, the last 10 years that Presbyterians allowed women to be, heads of churches. So it's an amazing story, and it comes out of Christianity, and it's in my book, and I celebrate it as an example of the power of empathy. They're barbarians, and then they give up these horrible practices.
Yeah, so if you can empathize with the different sides,
Yeah, well, you got to
can
figure,
transform the culture.
right? You got to figure that was part of his appeal. Is, hey, look at what you're doing to these people.
Empathize with racism. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that title, by the way. So when are you going to interview him?
Oh, that's already interviewed. That was like 4 months ago or 5 months ago. He said he'd be willing to do an empathy circle. So great. So I haven't just scheduled that yet. So
yeah, I'll send you what I wrote about him.
Okay.
Yeah, I just, he has his own ways of characterizing what he did with the Imperial Wizard. He said, racial hatred is all about ignorance. You educate people and the ignorance is gone, then the hatred's gone. That's his understanding.
Yeah.
And I try to show that woven into that his experience is empathy.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, he'd go along with that, definitely.
He probably would. I don't know. I'd love to talk to him.
I was a bit nervous, saying, hey, calling it empathizing with racism. He was good with it. He said, that's good with me. So,
he did. Oh, that's awesome.
I checked with him. Because I was invited to a workshop to, hold an empathy cafe. And there was like 90 people in it on Zoom. And I said, I put out the question for the cafe was empathizing with racism. What comes up for you around that? And it's like, and we divided into circles, and it was profound. It was just like, people were like, I can't talk about racism because, it's so polarized. You're either here, there's no nuances. And then we're doing the empathy circle, where they can say whatever they want. And plus it's like, and then I just remember one guy, he said, it can't be this easy. It can't be this easy. It's like,
that's part of what,
in the sense that everybody was hearing everybody, and you could say whatever you wanted. And you weren't like shut down. People can't shut you down. They can criticize you, but they can't shut you down. And they got to listen to you. They got to reflect back what you have to say to them. If they say you're an asshole, then then you can call them an asshole, and they got to take it in, and they got to reflect it back.
That's probably the kind of example I'm looking for. Yeah. So now I'm thinking, God, you deserve a whole appendix. I don't want to, chop up the flow of the chapter that has these other examples of powerful, transformations. I mean, there are these wonderful, you may not know about it, but there's a TED talk by a guy named Brian Picciolini. Ever heard of him?
Yeah.
Well, it's a TED talk.
Yeah.
And
he was a right-wing.
Yeah, he was a white supremacist.
Right.
He was a neo-Nazi. I mean, he was out there, right? And he said in this pithy way, what changed me is that I received empathy when I least deserved it. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got some pages on him. Check this out.
Oh, yeah.
That's him in the middle.
Yeah.
In our empathy tent. So we did.
Oh, wow.
He
oh,
came
cool.
into the empathy tent and we chatted.
Oh, cool. Well,
I
wish I had. I wish I had more time to research all of what you're telling me and incorporate it. But I'm just reporting what he said about his transformation. And then there are groups in Europe and some here that are doing these transformations of white supremacists. It's kind of there's some interest in the fact that they call themselves formerly white supremacists, neo-Nazi, and so on. So why couldn't what they're doing be expanded? They have a particular appeal because the people who are running it are formers. They were in white supremacy. And so, they have an appeal that may be more appealing than what you're doing. I don't know.
The thing is
but what you just showed me,
yeah,
what you just showed me about Brian being involved in that may obviate what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's the practice, having an actual practice that is the power of it. Like, Daryl Davis, I don't know if you saw his video of, there's a documentary about him, Daryl Davis. So he goes and listens to the Ku Klux Klan, but then he sits down at the table with some Black Lives Matter activists.
Oh, really?
He loses his cool. The whole thing blows up.
Yeah.
Because he can't listen to them. He says, you guys are ignorant. You guys, because he knows that if you listen to the right, you'll be able to work out. And they're saying that's bullshit.
Yeah,
but
I know.
Couldn't hear and empathize with them. But if they would have done an empathy circle together, had a basic structure, I think it would have sort of modeled, constructive dialogue for everyone.
Hang on just a second. My son wants to say something to me. Go ahead. Coffee? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, that's pretty compelling.
Well, if you ever want to do an empathy circle on this topic, I could bring a couple of friends and we could just do an empathy circle on your book, or you know what I mean? So we actually have a recorded dialogue. So you're kind of like practicing and modeling, and we can also publish it. So it's so I just offer that. Yeah,
well, I'll see. I want to investigate it more and think about it more, but so far I'm very attracted. And by the way, I've been working on this book for 4.5 years. I'm near sick of it, and my sister and I have to end it, and get it out there.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to make sure that we did homage to what you're doing for the sake of people who are at wit's end about what to do and how to get involved and so on. And I think this could really help them.
Yeah.
And to the extent there's a movement, like I said before, it deserves to be moved, to be broadened and spread throughout the land.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing a good, making the case for empathy,
Yeah.
showing all those stories. Here's why. And then people need somewhere to put their energy.
I'm doing
and inspiration.
I'm doing it on what might be called a hardcore intellectual level. People ask me what's my audience, and I say, oh, it's people who read the New Yorker and Atlantic and so on, who are very skeptical, very well educated, and like I said before, when you first hear your thing, it can sound superficial. And you're making the case that it's not at all. Okay. And I've got to figure out how to say that.
Yeah, it's a good point. I get what you're saying there. That I see that. I see that people sort of discount it because there's something that is this.
Yeah,
they don't have the experience, but somehow there's the status quo. They're into the status quo and the power structure.
That's where prevailing morality.
They can't see beyond. Even we did these mediations with the empathy circle in that documentary. It's like the people are hugging each other, right? At the end, they talk, and it's like, okay, that's great. Let's go back and fight and kill the Republicans, or let's kill the Democrats.
Well, that's where the concept.
It's almost like an addiction. It's like an addiction to the
battle. No. That's where the concept of ingrained prevailing morality going back centuries. That's what explains that.
Well, okay. How do we shift that? How do you shift that ingrained
well, you have to,
mentality?
Yeah, there's different ways. I mean, what you're doing is fine.
Yeah.
Good, wonderful. Actually, I shouldn't just say fine, but I think for the, like I talk to psychoanalysts. I talk to people who are beyond brilliant, who are leave me in the dust. And we talk about these things. And they have to be convinced by intellectual argument and exemplification and so on. And they're really, hold the keys to the kingdom. A lot of, like, what's that guy that writes for the New York Times? Friedman. He's already, we haven't talked, you and I haven't talked about that much about how, I've implied it when I talk about prevailing morality, that shame is, deeply believed in as a corrective to problem behavior. Well, the deeper version of it is humiliation. And Friedman is keen on how humiliation was influential in the Iraq War. Okay. And then I know a guy, I've had meetings with a guy who's prominent in international relations in universities. His name is escaping me at the moment, Blight. And he talks a lot about humiliation and how we have to practice, this is in my book, practice realistic empathy. That's in the field of international relations, okay? It goes back to the 1920s, where a guy named White talked about realistic empathy, and Blight had a conference with the leaders in North Vietnam way after the war, well, in the late 90s, talking about what would have happened if they had actually talked to each other about what their interests were. And the North Vietnamese interests clearly were, and verifiably were, we just want to preserve our country. We're not wanting to take over South Vietnam. And if that conversation had happened, the war wouldn't have happened. That's what Blight came out of that conference with. So this idea has such broad and deep application. And
it's
I met with him.
I think empathy is totally transformative. It's a narrow road to walk. It's easy to go off into all the blocks to empathy, but yeah.
Well, you have to deal with those. That's what I was setting out to say, is that prevailing morality is a formidable barrier. When you say we have these great talks and then they retrench, well, that's why they're retrenching, is because their more fundamental commitment is to, well, prevailing morality in general, but more specifically to the enforcement tools of prevailing morality. In other words, what protects us from danger and destructiveness in the world is a shaming, punishing, guilt-tripping
judgmental.
ideology, yeah, judgmental. Yeah, that's our security is dependent on that. I think that's what,
If
you
we
know,
could
so
if we can shift it, that our security is dependent on mutual empathy, mutual listening. I think that's the shift.
that's
And
the whole
I
point
think
of my book.
yeah, it's the core, and it's like if you're making the case for that, that's really great, because that's the shift that's needed. And how do we make that shift? And part of it is, that's why I'm running for Congress, right? It's like, let's take this to the power structures. Let's, I'll probably get, creamed, but at least it's a prototype. It's a model that, maybe others can build
Well,
on.
consider what I'm saying, that if you tweaked your thing a little bit, not that
In what
much.
way? In what
Yeah,
way?
well, to take more seriously what's oppositional, why, so I asked at the beginning, what accounts for your failures? Well, if people don't turn on to you, or if people relapse after being with you, it's because they're committed to this underlying ideology that's shot through our whole culture at every level. It's like deeply, powerfully believed in, that the only way to control people, to keep people from harming each other, to prevent barbarism, excuse me, is through guilt and shame.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, physical manifestation, incarceration, and, other forms of punishment. Then if you don't address that, then people can't take, a lot of people can't take you seriously. And they're gonna relapse because you're not addressing what's really driving their anti-empathetic behavior.
Well, what we have is the training that we do now, and the training creates a community of practice, and people get into it, and they become trainers of it themselves. So, and then they have a community, and so that seems to be a direction that's working.
Hang on just a second, will you? What?
Still work.
Yeah. What do you need? You want to go out?
We normally go out.
Okay. My wife informs me that we're due to go out. So
Okay.
thank you so much.
Yeah, to
And
be continued.
yeah, right.
Let me know.
I would love
I'd
to, by the
chat
way.
anytime.
And I don't mean this to be the end of it. So
Yeah.
you're going to, you've recorded all this, and
I'll send you a link.
you're going to
with
follow
it.
through on all your promises and so on.
Yep. I'll send you
Thanks
some
so
links.
much, Edwin. It was
Okay.
great to meet you. All right.
See you,
Bye.
John.